The disappearance of two 17-year-old girls, Pam Jackson and Sherry Miller, in 1971 forever changed the community of Vermillion, South Dakota. It also changed the life of one dogged reporter, Lou Raguse, who covered the twists and turns of the cold case that remained active for decades. Pam and Sherry were high school students on their way to a party when the Studebaker Lark they were driving seemingly vanished into the dark night. The girls were following a group of 3 boys who had agreed to show them the way to the gravel pit kegger. It was a big deal for the girls. They were looking for a way to get into the in crowd, and this party seemed like a good way to mingle with what were considered the cool kids. Somewhere along the route to the party, though, the boys noticed the girls' vehicle was out of sight. They assumed nothing of it at the time. When the girls' families realized the next morning that neither of them had made it home, panic set in throughout the households of the tight-knit South Dakota community. There was one individual, though, who really wasn't concerned. Sheriff Arnie Nelson. Sheriff Nelson immediately labeled the girls as runaways. That means a proper search wasn't conducted. He didn't make any effort to trace the route the girls would have taken that night. That information is revealed in Lou's new book, Vanished in Vermillion, which he released this year. Had someone else been at the helm of the Clay County Sheriff's Office, it's possible the course of history with this case could have taken a dramatically different turn.
Arnie Nelson obviously did a horrible job as a sheriff. It's my belief that he never even went out and retraced the steps from the church that they were last seen to the gravel pits that they were trying to reach, partly because he believed that they had run away. And then maybe when he finally thought, well, I better start looking into other possibilities, the rumors had already overtaken the truth. And the rumor was that they actually were trying to go to a different party down by the Missouri River in the complete opposite direction. So by the time he actually left his office to go look at anything, he was already looking in the wrong direction.
If someone had traced the route the girls had taken, their vehicle might have been discovered in the creek where it was ultimately found, decades after the fact. Sheriff Nelson's neglectful decision to label the girls as runaways proved detrimental to the case and created a domino effect of added turmoil for the families of the victims and those who stood accused. It could also be argued that the turmoil spilled over into the lives of those who got caught up in the investigation as well. I recently read Lou's book, Vanished in Vermillion. I highly recommend it. True crime books often focus on the crime itself and the investigation or lack thereof that follows. This story shows what happens when law enforcement makes critical mistakes in the investigation and how those errors can impact the lives of those caught in the tangled web of accusations and dead-end search warrants. Vanished in Vermillion peels back the layers of complexity that hide behind the headlines. Through years of added research and interviews with those involved, Lou Raguse tells the story in a way that captures the nuances of it all, the gray areas. And there are a lot of gray areas in this case. The case remained cold for decades. When the state's cold case unit was created decades later, there was a renewed interest. It was top of mind for the state's DCI investigators. The DCI is essentially the state's leading investigative unit, like an FBI, focused entirely, though, on the state of South Dakota. Each state has one, but their names vary. For South Dakota, it's the DCI. DCI investigators honed in on one man, one family, they believed was likely responsible: David Licken. In their efforts to prove their prevailing theory, chaos was created, not just for the one man who stood accused, but also for his family members, even his mom. David Licken did have a history of sexual abuse and violence. He lived just a few miles from where the girls were last seen, and investigators learned from a close family member, his own sister actually, that he was capable of murder and that his family was capable of covering up for him. I don't want to give too much away here for those who haven't read the book yet, but that sister was the key for investigators seeking a search warrant to search Lycken farm property. And they did. They dug up that farm more than once. Despite multiple search warrants and large-scale excavation digs, nothing was ever found. Eventually, Lycken was charged with the murder of the girls, but those charges were dropped when it was discovered that a so-called confession wasn't a confession at all.
On a personal level, I don't blame the investigators for looking into David Lycken, and I don't blame them for questioning his family members. But then what I do blame them for is when there is no good evidence, why can't you just pivot? Like, why can't you look at the big picture?
And then, in 2013, the case was solved. The Studebaker Lark driven by the girls was uncovered, upside down, in a creek near the area of their final destination. Lou Raguse was working as a reporter in New York at that time. He received an emotional call from a family member of the girls who had gone missing. There, before the news hit the local outlets, he learned the vehicle had been discovered by a local resident in an otherwise unknown creek. The family of Pam Jackson learned of the discovery together. They were gathered for the funeral of her father, Oscar Jackson. He had died days earlier at the age of 102. It was his life's quest to find his daughter. With a strong community belief that Lycken was still somehow involved, those who learned of the discovery still theorized that he had dumped the vehicle in the creek. Yet the investigation, which called on experts in automotive accidents, revealed that the girls had driven off the road. It was just that, an accident. Lou examines why some people still believe Lycken was involved, despite evidence to the contrary. He leaves the reader, at least this reader, pondering over that question too. Vanished in Vermillion is available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble sites, just to name a few. I highly recommend it, especially if you are into intriguing, investigative true crime, which I'm guessing you are. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Trisha Taurinskas. To read the full story and see photos, visit inforum.com/thevault.